The voicings we choose for comping depend on the situation. Shell voicings are great when there's no bass player. Two-note voicings are the way to go when there's a bass and a piano player. And no-root voicings are great for chord melody. But there's one set of chord voicings that are often overlooked, and these chord ticks all the boxes when you're the only comping instrument. These are no-root voicings, but with the chord sound on the 4th and 5th strings. They're essentially the same as no-root voicings on the top 4 strings. Just lower the second voice 1 fret. I'll change the fingering. Slide it up 5 frets, and then move over 1 string. But as you can hear, they're a more solid sound. They're not as bright as the chords that are on the first 4 strings. And they're in the perfect range. They're out of the way of the lead and the bass because they stay off the top and the bottom strings. And so what we end up with is 4-note voicings that have a lot more room for colors. Now there are 3 basic shapes that define the chord sound: the perfect 4th, the tritone, and the perfect 5th. The assumed roots are still on the 5th and the 6th string. Now there are 9 types of chords, but we're going to exclude the diminished 7th and the minor major 7th as they don't quite fit into this pattern. So now let's take a look at the chords. We'll start with the major 7 chords. Here are the available notes when the root is on the 6th string. Now let's take a look at some voicings. I'm going to use B flat as the root. Here's my chord sound. Now I'm going to add a 9th on the 3rd string, and then I'm going to add the 5th on the 2nd string, and this should look pretty familiar. It looks kind of like a D minor 7 chord, but I bet you never thought of it this way. Now we could also add 13th or a sharp 11. Now with the root on the 5th string, I'll do this in E so I can use the open string to make it a little easier to hear, but I'm always thinking about it as being on the 5th string. So here's our root and the basic chord sound. We can add a 5th up above, or we could add a 13th. We can add a 9th up above, but remember we can't add the root because it's going to clash with that 7th below, creating a flat 9 interval. Now let's look at the minor 7 chords. Here are the available notes for the root 6 form. All right, so here's our root and our chord sound. Now we can add a 9th to that, and maybe a 5th. And that looks pretty familiar too. So minor 7ths are major 7ths are minor 7ths? That opens up a whole new world. With the root on the 5th string, the options are a little bit more limited. So here's the root and the chord sound. We can add the 5th on the 3rd string and the root on the 2nd string, or double the 7th. But other notes are pretty tough to grab, so I don't use them very often. We use the same chord sound to create the minor 7 flat 5. With the root on the 6th string, here's our chord sound. Now the flat 5 is on the 2nd string, and so we need a note now on the 3rd string. Now we could just double the 3rd of the chord, which is another very familiar shape. But we could also add a 9th, which is a very hip sound. And this is one of the very few ways to play that chord. There aren't many options for the root 5 minor 7 flat 5. Here's our root, here's our chord sound, there's the 5th on the 3rd string, and the root on the 2nd string. Now if you want, you can double the 7th here, but that's about it. So by now, you should be realizing that triads are the 3, 5, 7 of another chord, and 7ths can be 3, 5, 7, 9. And now the dominant 7ths. We'll look at the natural tensions first. With our root on the 6th string, we find the 9th here, the 3rd here, the 5th, and the 13th. So here's our chord sound, and maybe we'll add a 9th and a 5th. Now, if we assume the root on the 5th string, it's the same tritone. But now the notes that were natural on the root 6 chord have become altered, and of course the reverse is also true. And don't forget that you can also have chords with natural 9s and altered 5ths, and vice versa. On the 7/4 chord, we can add a 9th, and sometimes you'll see a flat 9. And you can add the 5th on the 2nd string, because the 13 is a little too hard to grab. Now with the root on the 5th string, the 13th is pretty easy to grab, and so is the 9th. And what do you know, there's that major 7th chord again. You're starting to get the picture? The major 6 is similar to the major 7. Here's our root and our chord sound. We can add a 9th, and we can add a 5th, or maybe just a sharp 11. And with the root on the 5th string, we have the chord sound here, and we could add a 5th, and then maybe another root, where we have that minor 7th chord again, or maybe we'll add a 9th, or even a major 7th. Like the dominant 7th chord, the minor 6th chord has a tritone between the flat 3 and the 6. That means that both the root 5 and root 6 use the same notes. So here's the root on the 6th string, and the chord sound. We can add another root up here, and a 5th, but adding the 9th produces a really cool voicing. With the root on the 5th string, we have the same tritone, but now we're going to add a 5th and a root, and it'll create another familiar voicing. Now that's a whole lot of chords to grasp. If you'd like a PDF with these voicings, join my free Patreon group and you can download it. The link is below in the description. Now let's put it into play. 2/5s are a great way to learn chords. It's the most important progression in jazz. I'll build them one at a time, starting with the chord sound, and then adding a note on the 3rd string, and then another note on the 2nd string. This is in F major. And now in B minor. And so now let's play the blues. These chords open up a lot of possibilities. Because of the range, we stay in our lane and don't compete with the soloist or bass, but we can still add color tones we wouldn't use with other forms. Also, by adding notes on the 1st string, you can create cool 5-note voicings with both flat 9 and sharp 9, or flat 5 and sharp 5. These are mainly useful in solo guitar arrangements. And they also work nicely as inversions with the 3rd or 7th in the bass. Now, as we've seen, there were quite a few familiar voicings in there, but with new names. That's one of the biggest secrets in jazz, and we'll be looking at that in an upcoming video. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss it. And please like and share the videos too.